So it is time to welcome our next guest speaker. My daughter's over there laughing at me. Our next guest speaker is John Robertson. Now, John is a very interesting guy. This guy is one of the most intelligent people that we've come across. He's a WEN Global member, and he is actually a crisis management expert. But he's also an expert on helping us take our personal values and leverage them within our business and within our lives. And he's going to share with us some principles about how we do that. Let's welcome to the screen, John Robertson. Hi, John. Try it out, John. There you go.
I'm muted by you.
You're good. You're good. We hear you now.
Okay.
Yep.
So first of all, I thank you very much for the compliment. And there's a bunch of people that would differ with the intelligence comment, but let me just walk you through, because I've been doing crisis intervention for about 30 plus years now. And for those of you doing the math, yes, I started when I was 12. But the two things that I have noticed consistently when we are dealing with crisis intervention, number one, and Brian Tracy already spoke about this, leadership either soars or submarines. It will never be able to maintain that same level again. Leadership either takes off or it's under the water. But the second thing that always happens that I want to speak to now is when we are in crisis, real values get revealed. And Brian Tracy spoke to the refining of steel and the improving of steel. I use the teabag effect. If you ever want to find out what's important to an organization or to an individual, put them in hot water. What's inside always leaks out. And that's what crisis is hot water. So the three outcomes I want to provide for us in the 20 minutes or so I have is I really am asking you to be thinking about your thinking. First of all, there are always two sets of values in every individual and in every organization. And the second thing that I'm going to be asking you to be thinking about is, are we talking about motivation or are we talking about management? And Steve, you used the term crisis management specialist. If anything, I'm a crisis intervention coach, and I don't want to play semantics, but the key in values is motivation, because anybody can get their kids to do what they want them to do when somebody's watching. And the third thing is, in crisis, it's why leadership doesn't either soars or submarines. But the reason for that is, in crisis, leadership is about personhood. It's about their walk, or Brian called it their character. It's not about their talk or their charm. So picture the scene. I've been working with a senior manager. She is in charge of heading up with children and youth service work type things. And so she's what I would call B-suite. She's got the C-suite leaders above her, but she's got a bunch of personnel underneath her. She wanted to grow as a supervisor, improve her management skills and some of those other things. And we got going on some of those things. And then one day I got a text from Joanne. Picture the scene, quiet evening, sitting in the backyard, and I get this text from Joanne. And you need to be aware, Joanne does not text. And the text says, got time for a call, no question mark, nothing else. So I called her and I said, so what's going on? And we started chatting. She talked about the weather and the crisis that happened where she lives. And I said, Joanne, is there a point to this call, or did you just call to chat? And she started to laugh and she said, John, that's exactly what I needed to hear, because I am at the point of, I'm just pulling out my hair. I am so frustrated with my staff. They're not getting it. The financial reports are not being submitted accurately. Their Con Ed submissions are not being done. And now some of them are using their influence with the senior people, and it's becoming political as if it's my fault. Why can't they just grow up and do their job? Why can't they just work together and be glad they're at work? And I said, well, can I ask you two questions? Sure. I said, well, that was my first question. Can I ask? And the second one is, why should they be glad to be at work and work together? So what I want you to be in mind, and please be thinking about, is crisis always reveals the things that are always there. And the two things where conflict tends to happen most often is personalities. I call them natures. It's how we're wired. But the second thing is values. Natures, you're going to have those people in your life that you find really annoying at the best of times. Even when you're in a great mood, they kind of pet the cat backwards. Crisis makes those natures even more challenging. But the area that I want to speak to are core values. And so what happens is, maybe you can relate. You want to be a great leader. You want to help your people develop their careers. You want to add value to, well, to your C-suite leaders, those people above you that you know believe in you. You want to contribute and grow those, what I would call excellence in results. But maybe you can relate to some of the hurdles. You know, the ones, change means energy, energy means effort. And I'm so busy dealing with brush fires, and I don't have the energy to deal with all that stuff. You want to grow a company where customer referrals are driving business, where customers speak really well of your clients, but yet you're so busy dealing with customer complaints. And you know the comments that I hear quite frequently? You know, John, we've done the consultant, you know, we paid the big program, we've done there, all that stuff. And all we got out of that residual value after a couple of years was a big bill. The other thing that I hear quite often is, you know, John, when we started out, we hired somebody that we thought was a really good fit. And after a couple, 3 months and some changes that we needed to do, it's like we couldn't have picked a worse person, the wrong hires, or however I'm supposed to word that nicely. Because what ends up happening is the disconnect that starts to emerge and some of those other things. And don't forget, there's blaming. You know, Brian talked about take responsibility, but we love it in the workplace. We get to blame management, or blame the union, or blame newbies, or blame the old guard, and on and on and on. And you know the thing that I find the funniest, and it's a sad funny, not happy. Have you ever noticed when people don't understand you? When people don't understand what we mean or what we're saying, people say it louder. And by the way, those of you who speak a different language, you're going to recognize this right away. When people don't understand your language, it's like you're deaf. I'm not deaf. I don't understand your language. And what happens in these workplaces is, and maybe you can relate, all these people are talking really loud to each other because the mindset and, you know, playing well together isn't happening. Another thing that I'm hearing often, John, you don't understand our culture. You don't understand our business. You don't understand our leadership or how we approach those things. So I asked Joanne again, why should people be glad to be at work? Why should they be glad to work well together? And at first I thought the cell phone had been dropped, but then she came back with, because, and you know the answer, some of you are going to get it right away, because they're getting paid. And I said, okay, apart from the paycheck, why should they be glad to be at work? Why should they want to work well together? And her answer was so insightful. She said to me, John, because those are not my values. When somebody is paying me to do a job, I want to do an excellent job. That's not my values. And I said, okay. So what are their values, Joanne? In fact, Joanne, what are your values? Short story, Joanne got the funding. We started to do some work together, and we started to walk through, because most people make changes based on what they're trying to move away from, instead of what's motivating them, the value statement. Instead of, I don't want to go there again. instead of clarifying, okay, where do you want to go and why? Why is that important for you? So I started working with her first on what are her values. And I do not combine leadership and personnel, not to start. And we started talking about her values and what they were and what those behaviors and what some of those things should look like. And then I started working with some of her staff and started looking at some of their values and what those behaviors were. Now, there's a couple key things that I really want you to be mindful of, please. First of all, core values are not ethics. Ethics are the mirror test. That's what kind of person do you want to see in the mirror in the morning? Core values are those motivational pieces. They are the pieces that will compel you to take a stand. I can tell people's values changing gears. I can tell whether people have a core value of freedom. What they do on November the 11th at 11 a.m. for 2 minutes will tell me how much they hold the core value of freedom to a high level. But core values are those, what motivates us. It creates the productive environment. Let's be honest. If you and I are playing by the same values, I can turn my back on you because I'm not worried about getting knifed. And let's pretend, just to illustrate this, let's pretend that core value of football is a core value, okay? Let's just pretend that there is a core value called football. Do you know there are 4 types of footballs? There is European, which we would call soccer. There's Australian, which we would call rugby. There's American, and there's Canadian. So we're all talking about the core value of football, but we're not going to play very well together. In fact, you might accuse me of cheating and some of those other things. And so we have to take the time of clarifying what are your values. Programs have a shelf life about 2 to 5 years, and you can think about your business or yourself. Every 2 to 5 years, people and organizations start doing another program because the residual value isn't there. So they basically do the same things over and over, hoping for different results. Values is what Brian was talking about, is instead of listening to ourselves, start talking to ourselves. How we talk to ourselves is a value statement, and building on some of those pieces. So, you know, one of the silliest expressions that we use to draw a line in the sand, that's part of the problem. Do not draw, when it comes to values, please don't draw a line in the sand. Draw it in wet concrete. Let it harden. Now you have something to move forward from. Because if we draw a line in sand, the biggest breeze moves the line. And so when we're talking about those 2 sets of values, I told you they're in crisis, they leak. So there's the ones posted on a website, there's the ones that are listed in the brochures, and then there's that one that everybody operates by. In crisis, people are hypersensitive. And the key of values is never what you think you're telling me, it's always what I perceive. And what happens in an organization in a value statement is we are moving from website, you know, respect and care for our employees, versus the real values are, okay, John, you haven't been selling product, why not? And this might cost you a job. And so we end up moving from those actual to aspirational core values. And please, 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 please do not hear me as saying good, bad, right, wrong. I am talking about good and the best. I am talking about good and great, or right and the best. However I'm supposed to word, it's that last chasm I'm talking about, not good, bad, right, or wrong. The definitions have to be in writing. Business cliche, I think it's called, is if it's not in writing, it does not exist. A core value that must exist in your business will be profit. So picture a ladder. If you have a core value of profit, where does it fit with serving others? Well, if they can't help us make profit, then I can't serve them. On the other hand, if I have a core value of profit, but this is something that I can do to add value to people, that, you know what, I know I can help them even when they cannot pay me back right now. And we talked about this earlier with the value of referrals. So I did this work with Joanne, and I did this work with her personnel, and then we brought people together. And you know, the sad, funny part, or the irony part, is when people look at the values of their workplace, most of us want the same things in our workplace. And I don't remember what they ended up coming up with. It was an acronym, and some of the really creative people, the acronym was RIBS. Respect was one, and safety was the last one. I don't remember the I and the B. But they drew a visual of their core values to protect their vitals. They were going to use RIBS as their core values. And so they started walking through situations on how those values would work in this type of situation, dealing with this type of a teenager, with this type of family member or friends, whomever. And then learning how to ask the questions, and then refining. Obviously, there's things that need to get worked through and some of those other things. And what they started to do, and I already alluded to this, but what they started to do is they started to discover people's strengths and what's happening. And under no conditions do you misinterpret me as saying COVID-19 coronavirus is a good thing. That is not my point. But one of the things that I just alluded to is a crisis puts things in hot water, and people's values always leak out when we are in hot water. And what Joanne is now dealing with is some of her staff have to work from home, isolate, and some of those other things. And they are still trying to find a way to work 8 to 4 or 9 to 5, whatever their hours are. But some of her other personnel are really stepping forward. They are doing things that Joanne never imagined they would be willing to do. And they're getting it, and they're asking. And what's happened is some of their challenging colleagues, others are seeing the behaviors now, and they're now saying to Joanne, I get it. I now understand. Just to show you how values leak, and I haven't heard the update. One of Joanne's bosses or senior leaders said, if you have traveled and you do not isolate, you will be terminated or fired because we are dealing with children and youth. We will not tolerate that. 2 people traveled, did not isolate, and now Joanne has her staff and others who are saying, so what are the real values of our leaders? Are they going to walk the talk character, or are they just moving their lips? And now all of a sudden, Joanne has a workplace where people are engaged. They are motivated. In fact, Joanne is motivated. And she's energized, and she is enjoying what she is dealing with now, because the team is starting to come and when I teach core values, part of the process I use is the shift wrap process, but the harness is the alignment piece, and alignment is about core values. What happens when the core values are clear, you and I can disagree. It's called productive conflict. But we're operating by the same standards and values, or principles, if you will. And so she's now working with this team. So imagine if you don't. If your goal becomes, your organization's goal becomes just ride out this storm, tolerate it. Let's just keep dealing with brush fires. Let's keep dealing with those spot fires. And let's just, hopefully we survive. And don't forget, you're now dealing with kids throwing sand in the work box. And you get to deal with those grievances and those other things. But imagine if you do the work. Even if you don't like me, we work well together. Best visual I can give you, I can think, would be, some of you might not remember it, but it was an old game called a tetherball pole. And what it was a pole set in the ground, and there was a rope, that things would pivot around it. What people are doing today is they're doing a program called Vision Value Statements, but it is posting things on a website. They're not doing the behaviors behind those values. And what's starting to happen is they're putting that tetherball pole in sand. So the biggest hit, so complaint, grievance, conflict, stress leave, crisis, think about all the things that hit you and your workplace. When the pole is set in sand, the biggest hit moves it. So again, a value statement, set your pole in wet concrete. And no, I'm not a concrete manufacturer, but set your pole in wet concrete. Let it harden. Then your company, organization, and most importantly, you have something to pivot around. I have found that in this last little season, I have had to change some of the people that I'm serving because my values aren't lining up. Move from management. You know that model where you pull out your performance management model once a year with the staff, check a whole bunch of things off, and then it goes back into the filing system and pulled out? That's your management model. Do the motivation. Find out to get the best people on, for lack of better words, the best people in the boat with you so that everybody is rowing in the same direction. You know the simplest way to determine this? And I know that sometimes I tick people off, so please forgive me. I'm not trying to upset or hurt feelings. But how would people describe you in a non-physical way? That's your value statement, by the way. And if we don't like their answer, please don't get upset with them. They are not the ones with the issue. I would take the exact same question and I'm going to ask it of those of you in your workplace. How would people describe your workplace in a non-physical way? Those are your real value statements. That's when the rubber really hits the road. And like I said earlier, values are based on what the perceiver hears, not what I think I'm telling you. So make that values choice. Move from management to motivation. Because the advantage of crisis intervention is the old norm is gone. You have to define the new norm. And, you know, I'd love to connect with you. And if you'd love to connect with me, drop me an email. It's info@fortlog.co. And let me give you the value statement behind the domain. Fort, safe place in the frontier. You got to have a vision. You got to know where you want to go. A log is a journal to help others sail the sea because there's no point going there alone. And .co, it is not .com, it is .co because I work with you. I will not do for you. I colleague, I coach, I collaborate. It's a .co partnership. Let's do a coffee. Now, we can even do a face-to-face coffee, just can't do it physically face-to-face.